going to be, as you now hear, I'm going to be taping the program today so that others can hear us afterward. And the second thing is that I would ask you all to mute yourselves, if you wouldn't mind, while the speakers are speaking. And then when the time comes for questions, we can all unmute. Thank you. Our program today goes right to the heart of who Voice of the Faithful is, both our goals and our history. We began, I think many of you know, Voice of the Faithful began in January of 2002 in Massachusetts as a lay response to the clergy sexual abuse and the clergy kind of hierarchies cover-up. It was later that year, the same year of 2002, when Voice of the Faithful New Jersey began. And Teresa's here. She was one of the very first ones to start it. We began to hold programs at that very first time was our very first program. We were educational. And for 23 years, we have continued that mission. We've had more than 100 speakers in that time, and with a variety of topics and a variety of backgrounds. We also have meet for liturgies twice a month. We have had retreats and times or days of recollection. Our program today, as I said earlier, speaks directly to what has been our first goal from the very beginning, to support and advocate for survivors of clergy sex abuse. I would now like to introduce Peg Pipchick, who's our program chair, and she will introduce our speakers. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Carol. So this year, our theme for Voice of the Faithful presentations is gaining wisdom in difficult times. According to Cynthia Bourgeault, wisdom is about inner work and transformation. Wisdom is caught more than it is taught. So we've been talking about, as Carol said, clergy sexual abuse just for a couple of decades, despite it being in existence forever. So today we hope to gain a more conscious awareness within ourselves, perhaps open ourselves to the power of Christ's resurrection to prevent us from yielding to defeat of spirit or cynicism and experience more power rooted in love and resulting justice. So at this moment, we ask that you take a moment of silence. Bob Hoatson is a native of West Orange, Dr. Robert Hoatson. We know him as Bob. And probably everybody knows him. I probably don't have to say too much, but he's president and founder of the Road to Recovery. And that is one of his biggest passions. He himself is a survivor of clergy sexual abuse. He's a former Irish Christian brother, and he was an ordained priest in 1997. After founding Road to Recovery, he worked exposing clergy sexual abuse and cover-ups, and subsequently was suspended from priestly duties. The Vatican granted his voluntary removal from the priesthood in 2011. I'm not going to say anything more about Bob's book because I feel I will not do it the justice that it deserves. So I'm going to let Bob take over from here, and we'll confront this issue with him as he presents it.
Thank you, Peg. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to begin with a little bit of a history, if you don't mind, and then we'll move on toward things more connected to the book. I think many Catholics, perhaps most, and many other people, the general public, feel that the scandal of clergy sexual abuse in the church began in the 20th century, around 1980, 1970, in the United States, that is. Well, clergy sexual abuse has been on the lips and minds and hearts ever since the New Testament. And I'll come back to that. As you know, the Catholic Church was given recognition by Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. And clergy at that time became a privileged state, a class, and bishops were mostly exalted. And if you may have noticed, we never heard a bit of word about women. As soon as the clergy class became known, it was all male. And so we can trace the treatment of children, the treatment of women, et cetera, at least to the 4th century, and celibacy as well. But celibacy was not a mandate for clerics until the 12th century, the Second Lateran Council. But some leaders at that time began to mandate it. I'm talking about the 4th century, you know, when it was first, when the church was given status. But leaders at that time began to mandate it. And then it was completely mandated at the Second Lateran Council. And some of it was caused by the spread of sexual abuse of children by clerics. The Council of Elvira in 306 in Spain, half of the laws that were passed at that council dealt with sexual abuse, including penalties for those who committed adultery or fornication. There was no specificity at the time about homosexuality, behaviors of clerics, and the official church attitude was clear. Same-sex relationships were considered men who had sex with young boys, and they were deprived of dealing with young boys or men, even to the point of not being able to receive communion, even on their deathbed. So, 330 to 379, St. Basil the Great. In 1094, I'm skipping now, in 1094, St. Peter Damian wrote to Pope Leo IV in a paper entitled "Of Clerics and Monks Who Are Seducers of Men." And he was quoting Basil the Great from the 330s. This is in 1094 now. Here's what he says. He quoted St. Basil the Great, who commanded, quote, and this is going to be a little bit of a long quote, but it says, "Any cleric or monk who seduces young men or boys, or who is apprehended in kissing or in any shameful situation, shall be publicly flogged and shall have his clerical tonsure removed. Thus shorn, he shall be disgraced by spitting into his face, bound in iron chains, 6 months of close confinement, and for 3 days each week he was put on barley bread given to him during the evening. Following that period, he shall spend a further 6 months living in a small segregated courtyard in the custody of a spiritual elder, kept busy with manual labor and prayer, subjugated to vigils and prayers, forced to walk at all times in the company of 2 spiritual brothers, never again allowed to associate with young men for purposes of conversation or advice." Now, that being an example from the 4th and the 10th centuries and the 12th century, where can we learn where this discussion really began? And I can go through, St. Peter Damian and other saints who really alerted the church to acts of sexual abuse of minors. But we don't have to go to any of those centuries. We can go right to Jesus. Matthew 18, verse 6. If anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me, this is when he brought the child in front of him. If anyone does anything to have one of these children stumble, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and thrown into the sea. For those of you who don't know, there is a monument at St. Joseph's Parish in Mendham, with great thanks to Father Ken Lash and to Fred Merigliano, who had a lot to do with that. And it is a monument with a millstone and two children on either side. So it's a monument to all of those who were sexually abused. Now, the book I'm holding, I hope, The Sacrifice of the Masses, you've probably seen it in the flyers, etc. The title of this is The Sacrifice of the Masses. It was developed by my publisher, Katie Collins, who said, I think this would be a good title. And as soon as she said it, I said, my goodness, that says it all. Here we are, devoted to the sacrifice of the Mass, while the masses are being sacrificed as well in many, many forms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Fred Merigliano, fellow survivor, to tell us what his story of abuse was, and then I'll come back, and then we'll do more on sacrifice of the masses, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for a discussion. Fred.
How you doing, everyone? First, I have to say thank you to Father Bob and Father Lash, because I used to be I'm a survivor now, and it's because of them. I'm not a victim any longer. So I have to thank you too, and many other good priests and nuns. Thank you very much for making me a survivor. Now, my story goes back to Plainfield, New Jersey. I could remember the first day I was down in my basement. I was about 11 years old. And Father Contarto Amorie was a close friend of the family. They used to call him the Italian priest because many members of the family could not speak English. So they used to call him the Italian priest because they could communicate with them and they loved them.
Hello.
Hello.
Is everything okay?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, so he was like in our household a man of God. But I remember the first time I was raped and abused by him. It was down in my father's basement. And I remember when he was raping me, I looked up at the window in the basement and I kept on focusing on the window. And I thought to myself, I hope to God my friends aren't outside looking in. I was terrified. What happened the next week? The same thing happened. And it happened over and over and over again. So what I finally did was I hid outside and he found me and he raped me outside in my father's yard. Then after that, I thought to myself, well, I'll go upstairs in the parlor, we used to call it. It's now the living room. And I went upstairs and that with my father, because he was watching television, And Contardo waited till my father would fall asleep, and then he would rake me in the same room that my father was in. And he did that over and over and over again. Then I went hid from him. I went outside to hide from him. And when I was hiding, he came out, but he couldn't find me this time. And then I knew he was abusing my two brothers. And when he couldn't get to me anymore, he went to my grandma and my mom, and he wanted to take me away to Staten Island because Contardo was a visiting priest from Staten Island. He used to say mass and hear confessions at St. Bernard's. So when he couldn't get to me anymore, he went to my grandma and my mom, and he asked them if it would be all right for him to take me away. And I could remember me arguing with my grandmother, and I didn't want to go. And she said, "Oh, you have to go. He's a man of God. You're going to hurt his feelings." So I went with him. And I could remember being driven away in a black car. And it felt like an undertaker's car. And I would lean on the door and pray to God that the door would open and I would fall out so I wouldn't have to go with them. But I didn't have the courage to open the door myself. So I went with them. And I thought to myself, well, what I'll do is lock the door when he puts me in a room, because I was supposed to be sleeping there for the weekend, and he won't be able to come in. Then when we went there, I found out that there was no locks on the doors. So the only thing I could think of was me putting a chair in front of the door so he wouldn't be able to come in. But that didn't stop him. He just came in. He just came in. And for a period of time when he came in, my mind just went blank. My mind just went blank. Then I remember him the next morning taking me around to meet his friends. Some of them were brothers and some of them were priests. And I felt like I was his trophy. He was showing me off. Then I could remember him taking my brother Mike and I to Times Square, to the movie houses. And he would molest us in the movie house. He would put a jacket on my lap and a jacket on my brother's lap. And what would happen to me was my soul would separate from my body and I would float to the ceiling. And I would look down and I would see these two young boys being abused. And that happened over and over again. And afterwards, sometimes he used to take us to Italian restaurant. He used to take us to this one Italian restaurant. And I could remember that he left the guy a 10 cents tip. And the waiter said to him, hey, buddy, hey, you need this dime more than me. And I looked at my brother and he had a big smile on his face. And it was something very small, but we felt like we had a victory. We felt like it was something that we just won. And then I could remember he used to take us to the shore swimming. And he used to come into the dressing room and he used to rake me in the dressing room. And that happened over and over and over again. And a couple of times he used to take us to, and he used to take my cousin Ralph and my brother Mike to Kingsburg. And the same thing. He would always come into my dressing room when we were getting dressed, when we were putting on our bathing suits. And he would do it over and over again. And then years later, when my kids were about my age, when he abused me and my two brothers, he called up and he wanted me, or he wanted to come over to meet my kids. And when he called me and asked, I just went crazy. I was screaming, yelling at him, and I used cuss words I never even knew I had, and told him if he ever came over to my house, I would kill him. And thank God he never did, because I would have went to jail. But I used to have nightmares constantly that I walked in my house and found Contardo in my house with my two kids and with a smirk on his face. Thank God he never came over. But the nightmares, I still have nightmares. I used to have a nightmare that I was on the toilet bowl in my kitchen and my friends and family would walk by me and talk to me. Then I used to have nightmares that Contardo was raping me and I was beating them up. And my wife woke me up. Maggie woke me up because I wasn't beating up Contardo, I was beating up Maggie. But thank God that she knew. She knew what was going on. But I just have to thank the good priests and nuns. There's so many people I have to thank for saving me. Good priests and nuns and my family. And when I was having a hard time, a very hard time, a number of my family and friends came over. And I guess they knew, and they would tell me their story. Their story, how they were abused by different people. But again, Father Bob, Father Lash, thank you. Thank you for you.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you for bringing me from being a victim to a survivor.
Thank you, Fred. And by the way, this was the man at the age of, may I say, late 60s, who walked from Cape May to Mahwah, New Jersey, with his wife Maggie, and some of us helped him. Mary Gannon and Jerry were very good to him, and others. And Fred walked from Cape May to Mahwah in order to bring attention to the Child Victims Act that we were trying to get passed in Trenton, which we did get passed after 20 years it took us. But thank you, Fred. I guess I'll come back now to it's 5:00, 5:03, and I'm hoping that we can finish the formal part around 5:30, and then it'll give us a half hour because I know I'd love to have a dialogue with everybody, and I'm sure you have lots of questions. So now, this book is essentially my story, and it begins with an acknowledgement or I guess it would be a criticism. And it says the Catholic Church is the most corrupt institution in the world. And then I try to help people understand what that means when they're reading it. And I meant that the institutional church is the most corrupt. And I was talking about popes, cardinals, archbishops, bishops, maybe monsignors, with one exception, Ken Lash, but people who had power and authority. And what that has been my experience ever since. The first day I entered religious life in 1970, a few months previous to that, I graduated from Essex Catholic High School in Newark, New Jersey, and I received the most outstanding senior award out of 600 seniors, all boys. So I was on cloud nine, you can imagine. And I had been accepted into the Christian Brothers. And I knew I had a vocation, and I was so excited and ready to go. Well, the first superior I had in New Rochelle, at a place called St. Joseph's Hall, which was the postulancy the first year, said to me, "Bob, you're a cold person. I'm going to have to warm you up." Well, I was such a naive 18-year-old at the time. I didn't know what he meant. I thought he was pointing out something flawed in me. And I said, the superior has to be right. So I went into severe introspection. I mean, severe, to the point where nothing made sense to me what he said, but I couldn't figure out exactly what he was talking about. Okay. So he continued that mantra throughout. And then I got to the novitiate, and he used to threaten me, the first guy. He used to threaten me with, "I'm not sure I can pass you on to the novitiate." And it was always a ploy, and I didn't know it at the time. It was always a way to get to me. Well, I got to the novitiate, and my novice master sexually abused me. Now, novitiate, as you know, is a canonical term that every religious has to go through. You have to go through a novitiate. And it's usually in a secluded, prayerful, rural area in many cases. So I was up the Hudson River in a place called Esopus, West Park, and my novice master, after each of my monthly conferences, would stand and he would grab me, hug me tight, and I could feel his erection very, very close to me. And that's when I had my first major panic attack. And I ended up leaving the brothers at that time. I left on February 29th, leap year of 1972. Foolishly, I re-entered the brothers, but I was dying to do something in the church and minister. So my novice master had died. He died of alcoholism on the floor of his bedroom at a different location. And the new novice master was a good guy, basically, but I wanted to be a brother. Well, I took first vows, and a classmate of mine with whom I had grown friendly. Now, remember, I was 2 years older than these men because I had left and then came back. So this young man, we were on vacation down in Ventnor City, New Jersey, which is where the brothers and the many religious orders used to go. Many of the nuns' orders in New York had houses there. The Jesuits had a house there. There were and the brothers used to rent out many houses from different communities. So this friend of mine, I got into obviously it was August in Ventnor, and we didn't have any air conditioning. So I was in my underwear, and I was under the covers, just the sheet, because it was so hot. Well, this classmate of mine pulled his chair over to me, and he sat next to me. I said, "Uh-oh, he's going to tell me that he's going to leave, and he didn't really want to take vows." So no. He put his hand on my body and went from my toes up to my genitals, and he abused me. Well, in the next anteroom was the superior of the community. And I got so frightened that he would hear us or hear him that I just froze entirely. And this happened a few more times, and a few more times after that. And after we came back from the Jersey Shore, several times after that. And it lasted almost 4 years because I couldn't possibly report it or say anything to anybody. I tried, but no one listened. Well, anyway, so I go on the mission, we call it on the mission, and I'm assigned to East Harlem. And I have a superior there who I knew was I learned he was a very good guy. He was a psychologist. And now I left there. I was transferred out of there after a year. And I went to New Rochelle, New York. Well, the abuse by that classmate continued. So here I was trying to teach high school boys, and I was the athletic director, and I'm fighting off these acts of abuse, and I'm getting more and more depressed and more anxious. And of course, I couldn't ask to go to a psychologist because they would have, they would have thought something was wrong, and it was. But anyway, so then after that, I'm transferred because at Blessed Sacrament High School in New Rochelle, for 3 years it took me to get rid of the principal and superior of the brothers community. His name was Robert Post. And because of my antenna, we victims like Fred and I, we have antenna about abuse. We can sort of smell it a little bit or a lot. And this guy was just hanging around kids too much and touching them. So I petitioned, guess who? The man who first told me I was cold, because now he was in a position of authority in the province. So I told him, he was on visitation. I said, "You've got to get rid of Bob Post. He's abusing kids, and I can swear to it." Well, they didn't believe me. Well, it turns out 30 years later, when or 40 years, whatever it was, when Blessed Sacrament closed, and I was invited back to a closing barbecue, one of my former students runs up and says, Bob, you got to talk to Richie. So Richie was one of Post's victims, and we found out that there were about a half dozen or more. But I was transferred out because I was pestering them to help protect the kids. So I went back to Harlem, to Rice High School, and 2 years there, and then I was assigned to Boston. And well, I won't go into all of Boston, but Boston, the school there had probably 6 or 7 sexual abusers that I knew of. And well, anyway, in 2002, I'm a priest now, okay, in 2002. I get a phone call from Boston. It's from a woman that I was very friendly with who helped raise, I was the fundraiser. She helped me raise funds, etc. So she said to me, "Father Bob." I said, "Pat, how are you doing?" She says, "Oh, Bob." She says, "Gary just went public in the Boston Globe, etc." I said, "Oh my God, that was one of the kids I thought was being abused." And then I said, "Well, did David go public too?" She said, "No, not David, just Gary." I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, because I suspected Father Fred Ryan when I was back in 1981. And I went to the headmaster and I said, you got to get rid of this priest." "Are you kidding? He's the vice chancellor of the Archdiocese of Boston. He was the chaplain here. He does many of the weddings and funerals of families and baptisms, and you name it." And he was pedestalized like you couldn't believe. Father Fred. But I knew something else. And I suspected 2 of the most handsome kids on the football team, because I was the football chaplain. And I was looking out for them. And I just didn't have firsthand info. So anyway, I'm in the school one night, and I go into the school. We were attached to the school, the brothers' residence. So I went in to do some mimeograph, the old mimeograph. No, I guess we had Xerox by then. But anyway, there's a kid there, and I said, Eddie, what's going on? He was a football player. I said, Eddie, what's going on? He says, oh, Father Fred's taking us out for our annual dinner, the captains. I said, oh, where do you go? Oh, we go to Joe Tecchi's in the North End. Now, Joe Tecchi's served wine in Coca-Cola dispensers. So Fred would take the captains there and use the Coca-Cola dispensers to get these kids drunk, and then he would take them back to his residence in the chancery, and he would go into his closet. This is just one example. Go into his closet, get his doctor's coats out, put all the kids in doctor's coats, have them strip, and they just have the coats on, and he would say, no, I got to measure your muscles. I will measure your muscles all through. Now, most of these kids were seniors, but David was a freshman, the one I just mentioned. So David got caught up. David was a freshman in my first homeroom. He was bigger than the other kids, and he was as handsome as Tom Cruise was, okay? And I said to myself as I was his home, I said, I got to keep an eye on this kid. He was the freshman quarterback, and then the varsity coach brought him up to kick field goals in our big Thanksgiving Day game against Boston College High School. Well, Fred used to hang around the varsity team, not the freshman. So until then, David was fairly safe. But then when Coach Cutting brought him up to the varsity, Fred was standing outside the school one day, and Dave came out after showering, etc. And Fred said, "Hey, Dave, how you getting home? My mother's coming." "Oh, okay. Call your mother. Tell her I'll drive you home." Now, this was a kid who went to public school, so he had no notion really of what Catholic school, Catholic priests, blah blah blah. So he calls his mother, and she says, "Of course you can go, David. The priest wants to take you to bring you home, fine." And he said, "But tell her that I want to take you to Joe to do a restaurant first." So they go to Joe Tecchi's. Poor David's by himself. In the Chancery in Boston, there was obviously a driveway, and then they made a left turn, these guys, and they clicked on the remote, and the garage was underneath. So as soon as he brought these kids in, they were trapped. So he brings David up the elevator to Fred's, and one whole wall of Fred's apartment was Catholic memorial kids in various states of undress. So he says to David, he put him on the doctor's thing, whatever it was. And then he measures Dave's muscles. And then he does this, the thinker? He says, "Dave, I want to take pictures of you as the thinker." And David's naked. And David's drunk because he went to the restaurant. So he goes home and he sobered up a little, I guess a lot. And he never could tell his parents at all, of course. Well, 20 years later, when I got that call from Pat Pink, I finally contacted Gary, and I found him. He was living in Charlestown at the time. And I said, "Gary, I'm very sorry." He said, "What are you sorry about?" I said, "Gary, I knew what I said, I sensed what Father Fred was doing to you guys. And I did scream to the headmaster to get rid of him, but I should have screamed a lot louder." He says, "Bob." And I said, "Gary, let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard from David?" He said, "Are you kidding? I'm sitting outside David's house." When Gary was in the newspaper, David saw him and called Gary and said, "Me too, Gary." So I got the two of them together, on the phone. And I said, "You know what, guys, if you want, I'll come up on my day off in Jersey and I'll work with you if you want, some help." "Absolutely," they said. So I was doing trips to Boston and back, at least weekly. And those two guys are talked about very extensively in this book and it really was the beginning of Road to Recovery, because that's when I asked Father Ken Lash, Monsignor Lash, Ken, I think we have to do something more specific for victims. And he said, yeah, he says, SNAP is a great organization, the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. It's an internationally well-known and help the victims. But we were seeing people who needed shelter, clothes, food, rent, referrals to therapists. So we wanted to get into the ditches, so to speak, and that's the beginning of Road to Recovery. And I kept coming home from Boston saying, "Oh, I got to do more. I got to do more." Well, in 2003, I went to Albany and testified before the New York State Legislature and called for the resignation of bishops who covered up sex abuse. And 3 days later, I was called in by Myers and I was fired as the director of schools of Our Lady of Good Counsel in Newark. And I want to thank Archbishop Myers. It's taken me all this because he gave me the path, part of the path, leaving the priesthood and then doing this full time, doing Road to Recovery full time. So after the piece in here about the boys, I then go into my story. And I was abused from the ages of 3 to 30. And at around the age of 29 or 30, I was in Boston, stationed in Boston, and I was still being abused at that time. By whom? Well, I went home a couple of years before that from home. I went home to New Jersey, Easter vacation, and I was so depressed that my parents were ready to put me in a hospital. So I said, no, let me try something. Do me a favor, call Frank O'Brien. He's in Staten Island, Monsignor Farrell High School. So they got a hold of him somehow. And I said, he's a psychologist. He might help me. So I went to Staten Island and we spent 4 hours in the Burger King. And I told him my whole story. And he said, Bob, you have nothing to be ashamed of. It was all, you were prey, P-R-E-Y. So I said, well, Frank, do me a favor, would you? Would you come back to Jersey with me and tell my parents that I'll be okay? Because now I've let I've let the cat out of the bag pretty much to one person finally. He said, yeah. So we went back to West Orange, New Jersey, my parents, and we sat at the kitchen table and Frank, blah, 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 blah. I said to my parents and Frank, listen, I'm going to bed because I am wiped out. And I fell asleep for the first time in many, many decades like that. So my parents said to Frank, listen, and I didn't hear this because I was in bed already. They said, Frank, why don't you spend the night because Staten Island's a good, hour and a half trip. So I'm sleeping in my bed in this room and Frank's in the next room. And the next thing you know is middle of the night, I hear somebody crawling into my bed. I feel somebody. It was Frank. The same guy I had just emptied myself to. Well, that went on for about a year and a half. Finally, my parents don't know anything about that, of course. And when he did it, I said this. As he was abusing me in exactly the same way I was describing it to him several hours previous, I said to myself, oh shit, not again. And I just froze. So Frank drove me back to Boston. Nice. Okay. And I finally said, I had the peace of mind to say, that's the last time anybody's going to freaking abuse me. Well, guess what? We get back to Boston. I go into my room and I said, thank you for the ride, Frank. And he lays me on the bed and abuses me for the last time. And I did. I said to myself, that's it. But I was 30 years old. So I was abused from 3 years old. And I cannot describe to you from 3 years old to about 12 years old. I just can't go to there yet. But I was abused by my parish priest and the custodian of the parish around the 5th and 6th grades. And then at 14, my mother and I went to a department store in West Orange, And I went into the bathroom, the men's room, and a guy comes in and he tries to grab me from the urinal. But I was able to knock his hand away. And I ran out. And believe it or not, there was a security guard outside this bathroom, and I couldn't tell him. I just ran for my life. And I had to decompress before I saw my mother because she would have thought there was something wrong. So I kind of breathed. And well, I was in my first year at Essex Catholic in Newark. And one of the brothers said to me, "Could you help us out at an alumni event?" I said, "Sure." So I'm there at a huge alumni event because we were a school, of 2,300 boys at one point. So I don't know how many classes were at this event, but it was massive. And don't you know, I'm walking doing something, and across the room, I spotted the guy that tried to grab me in the bathroom. And I go into panic again. The guy that tried to abuse me was an alumnus of the school I went to. I couldn't say anything either. And I certainly wouldn't have started to scream because the brothers would have, they would have tried to figure out what was going on. So these are the kinds of things. And then the rest of the book primarily talks about the abuse I suffered as a brother and a priest in non-sexual ways. And it was horrific. And I'll give you one example. And then we'll open it up. I was assigned, oh, by the way, every place I was assigned, there was abuse. My first assignment as a priest was, well, let me go back to the seminary. I think I was one of the only seminarians who was not sexually active while I was in the seminary. I would bet my next week's salary on it. So it was very sexually charged. And, the guys at lunch, see, the priests had to walk through our dining room to get to their own dining rooms. And the seminarians would say, "Oh, there goes Kitty, there goes Sally." And they're talking about the professors, the priests. So anyway, I just lost my train of thought for a second. As they're walking through, I began to realize that these were priests that were inviting different seminarians to their rooms in various places, in the rectory, in the seminary, or in other places on campus. So I'm assigned to Bayonne, my first assignment. And the pastor says to me as soon as I get there, "Bob, don't worry about saying masses. Somebody will say them for you." I said, "John, what was I ordained for?" Then he says, "You can have 2 days off." We were supposed to have a day and a half off. Okay. But then he says to me a couple weeks later, he says to me, "By the way, Bob, you're going to hear from this family in the parish. So, the Crawfords." I said, "Okay, what about them, John?" "They're crazy. Don't go near them." I said, "Well, what's the story?" "They claim that your predecessor, one of my predecessors, not the most immediate, Ken Martin, who became McCarrick's secretary at one point, sexually abused Mark Crawford and his brother." Now, Mark Crawford currently is the SNAP New Jersey coordinator. So John saw me bow my head as soon as he told me that because I was feeling outrage and also sadness. And at that point, I said, "I'm not staying here any longer." So after 1 year, I asked McCarrick for a transfer. And you know what? You don't ask for a transfer in your first assignment until it's finished in 6 years, because then you become a malcontent. Well, guess what? I'm transferred to Holy Trinity Hackensack, where I'm replacing a priest who sexually abused the undertaker's son on a trip to Cancun. And I saw the picture. The kid, they were in a taxi cab, and he wasn't a kid, he was just a young adult. He reached out with his camera and took the picture of the priest going down on him in the cab. And I saw the picture, and I said, "Oh my God, what the hell is going on?" Well, let me skip ahead, and I'll be finished in 2 minutes. Excuse me. So then I leave Holy Trinity. I was the principal of this grade school, and I was the full-time associate pastor. I did 30 of the 50 weddings that year. I was loving it because the kids were great and the parishioners were fantastic. And I worked for an auxiliary bishop who was a complete jackass. Well, anyway, I leave there and I go to McCarrick, and I say, Archbishop, what happens next with me? He says, well, how about associate superintendent of schools? I said, okay, sure. That's my educational background. But then he's transferred to Washington, D.C. And Bishop Butkowski becomes the interim bishop. And he hated me because he was friends with the bishop in Holy Trinity, Hackensack, who began to hate me. Well, anyway, I go to Our Lady of Good Counsel. I said, sure, I'll go. I was in charge of 2 schools that were teetering on just disaster. I said, no, I like the inner city kids. We'll do fine. Well, you can't live here, though, in Good Counsel, because everybody speaks Spanish in the rectory and the housekeeper and the cook. I said, okay. So believe it or not, I ended up living in Our Lady of Lourdes in West Orange, my hometown. I said, oh, that's nice. And the superior there, the pastor there welcomed me. I said, oh, good. Well, I was there for 2 years, about a year and a half, I guess. And the pastor comes into my room one afternoon when I got back from school, and he says, Bob, I need to speak to you. He closes the door. He says, I'm going to be moving my best friend in to the rectory across the hall from you. Oh, I said, why is he? I thought he was the pastor of St. Aloysius in Jersey City. Oh, he was, but he has told me that he abused a kid in the early 70s, but it was only once, and he'll never do it again. I said, Joe, you can't do that. What do you mean? I said, you can't put a pedophile or an alleged pedophile in a rectory. They can't live in religious. And I said, do you see 200 yards behind us is our school? Oh, well, he did it anyway. So guess what? I have to go down to the Newark. And I told Joe, I said, Joe, I will not stay here under those conditions. So I go down to Newark and I talk to the Vicar General, the infamous Bishop Arthur Serratelli, who was Myers Vicar General. So this is what I say to Serratelli. Bishop, do you know that Peter Cheplik has been moved into my rectory in West Orange? Quote, oh, that man. Oh, excuse me. Oh, that poor man, what he's been through. Nothing about the victims. By the way, we found out at least a half a dozen more victims of Peter Cheplik in the meantime. So then I end up going, he says, all right, you move out. So I had a friend living in the rectory in Closter, way up by Rockland County. So I go there and I start living there. And one of the nuns says to me, aren't you the priest that works with victims? I said, yes. She said, I will need to speak to you. And then she and all the 3 other nuns come to me one at a time and talk about the horrible things happening to them with the superior in the convent. Not sexual, but just psychological and abusive and organizationally and everything else. So let me stop there because, as Ken Lash said to me after he read it, he called me right away and said, ooh, so a lot of this was my memory too. So, and he also said it was a page turner, but it's a tough book, especially for those who have great, great affection for this institution, the church. So let's open it up. Carol, or Peg, you want to just, we have 1/2 hour, or well, 28 minutes.
Hey, so can anybody who has any questions or comments? Okay, Peter?
I'm kind of in shock because I went to high school with Peter Cheplik.
Oh,
We were very good friends
wow.
up through the point of his ordination. I mean, he was at St. Matthew's in Richfield. He was at
Yes.
in East Orange.
Yes.
Holy Spirit, Our Lady Help of
A
Christians.
Christian. Right.
And then and then I know he was transferred to St. Al's in Jersey City.
Right.
And I did know that he took a young man from Ridgefield
That's
on a
right.
trip to Australia. And I
That's right.
thought that's not a good thing to do, because this guy was young, attractive, muscular, you know, and then it all came out that uh, there was sexual abuse, and he ended up in Rutherford at the St. John
Right.
Vianney home. But I had always thought it was just that one incident, but I guess it was more than that. So
Now, Peter, do you know he died recently?
yes, I went
Okay.
to his funeral, as a matter of
Okay.
fact, because I felt connected to his family,
Right.
but I had
See,
very mixed feelings about doing that.
yeah,
Because
Joe Capozzi was the
Joe
young boy.
Capozzi, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and then Joe Capozzi and 5 or 6 others came forward. But Joe has been a great advocate as well for, Fred and I know him, Ken Lash knows him,
He's
maybe
written
somebody
a
else.
play, I know. He wrote a play,
And he wrote a play called For Pete's Sake.
for Pete's sake, yes.
His abuser was Pete Cheplick. The play, oh, we showed the play at the Morristown, what was the Ken, what's the church?
That was at Grace Lutheran Church in
Grace
Mendham,
Lutheran. Right,
yeah.
right, Mendham. And he did it off Broadway too, a couple of sessions. Joe's a wonderful guy, yeah. But
Well
Peter,
done, very well done.
anybody else?
It's just very hard to hear it again, because he was a good friend and I knew his family, and but
Yeah. What high school are you talking about, Peter?
Holy Family in Union City.
Oh, and in West New York? I mean, in
Union City,
Union City, yeah.
35th Street. He had gone to St. Augustine's in Union City Grammar School, elementary school. Anyway, I
Anybody
really
else?
had no
I'm sorry.
contact with him after I knew what had happened.
Yeah.
And did you have something you wanted to say?
Anyway,
Who's that?
And
No, I'm okay.
Bernice.
I do,
I
yeah.
think Bernice is.
Yeah, I wonder, in all of these terrible things, were there any priests abusing women?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Who said, oh, yeah?
Fred.
Fred. Yes. Yes. Well, I didn't mention it here, but I did mention it earlier about the history of the church. Women were just, dismissed in terms of getting any kind of religious authority or anything. And the confessional, that's where a lot of the women abuse. And so, you know what they did? They built the confessional back, centuries ago. The confessional as we knew it. And that's where a lot of women were abused because they were not allowed to have contact with priests except in the confessional. And that's where priests who were looking for women would then sexually abuse them. Yeah, so the confessional was a bad spot for both children and then of course women who were having trouble with their marriages, they would go into the rectory parlor and theoretically be counseled, but nobody was watching them.
mhm,
But you didn't know any of these personally. I mean, you didn't mention anything about that. So, but I would just wonder if you had knowledge of any of that.
Yes, I can tap my brain for more, but yes, a lot. But you know what? A lot of the women's abuse never surfaced
mm.
because it broke marriages. It did a whole lot of.
Bob, you mentioned earlier, this is Peg, about the church being so punishing and convinced this shouldn't happen. Where did that change?
Well, good point, Peg. It changed incrementally. Let me give you an example. In the 19th century, Pope Leo, excuse me, is it Leo the Fourth? Yeah, Leo the Fourth. No, that's what no, it's, hang on a sec, Pius the Ninth. Pius the Ninth, there were reforms occurring in the church in the 1800s. He stopped them. So some of the reforms had to do with sexual abuse of children, but he basically sent the church back, well, I don't know, centuries maybe, or at least decades. But then we had in the 20th century John Paul II, who put the church back after the reforms of John the 23rd and aggiornamento, open the windows, let's get the air in. And then Benedict was the one who received all of the cases, basically, as head of the Inquisition. The faith. What's the word I'm trying to think of? What was the office he was in charge of? The Congregation for the Faith, yeah. And then he resigned because I think he knew the extent of what was going to come forward, and so. Peg, it depends on who was number one, who was in charge, And now Francis comes in and tries, but Leo just today, did you see what Leo the 14th did today?
No.
He spoke out about how child abuse is forbidden, and in the same breath he said, "And I want to make sure that celibacy is stressed."
Oh.
Well, it's counterintuitive. Those two terms, that's counterintuitive. Celibacy has to go, should never have been. And women should have been priests, and the whole 9 yards,
Yeah, a celibacy is not the cause, but there's a link. There's a link. Absolutely.
Hi, my name is Grace. My brother was a Vincentian for many years. And at one point, I remember him saying when he was in the seminary, what was going on among the seminarians. I also know that when he was brought back, he was assigned to Panama for many years. When he came back, they assigned him to Princeton, to the minor seminary.
Oh, yes.
And he said what was going on there was absolutely abominable. He made so much of a stink about it. It was just unbelievable. And that it should be closed. There should never be one of these minor seminaries. He said if they weren't being abused by one of the priests, they were just experimenting with each other because they were brought in so young. They were given absolutely no education whatsoever on sexuality, and they just were left alone every weekend, and they did nothing but experiment with each other. And he wound up being asked to leave. So he went to St. John's U and finished his education and left the priesthood. So that I was aware of some of this stuff. The other question that I've always had is, why have not all these people, as their names came forward, as it became known, why were they not subjected to civil law? Why were they not arrested and put in prison? Because anybody out here that is a civilian out here, a layperson, if a teacher sexually abuses a kid in the local public school, they're going to jail. And I don't understand how they've gotten away with it all this time, that they weren't sent to jail.
Grace, it had to do with the statute of limitations. You see, when children are abused, they very often can't even talk about it until they're well into their adulthood. And the statute of limitations went quickly. It prevented them from getting any justice under the law. Now it's a little bit different. In 1996, New Jersey changed its criminal law, so anybody abused after that date, has ability to report a crime, et cetera. But that's the general reason.
Bob, can you say something about fear and shame and the difficulty for children to talk about this?
Virtually impossible. Virtually impossible. I didn't say anything until I was 50. Well, I told people along the way that I thought I told a deputy provincial of my community, and he just said, "Oh, well, Bob, go see a counselor, please. I don't have time for you." But he was dating a nun at the time, and he was leaving to get married. So if children reported it to anybody, they were either shut down or they couldn't do it. And as soon as they were abused, they thought they were the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
A priest could not possibly be abusing me. You know why? Because he's the second coming of Christ, essentially. So that means God's abusing me. And no one will believe a little kid, they wouldn't. Yeah, Ken, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's what it happens is it's like a web. And the child gets caught in this web and they can't get out of it. And they're feeling guilty because they think they're the reason why this is happening to them. So they can't, they're trapped. They're trapped for years until someone somehow enables them to speak. But it takes years for some people to acknowledge that. But even for teenagers, it's like it's a web. You say, well, why does this happen? You know, if it happened once, well, you think the kid would say, I'm not going back. It's not like that. It's hard to explain. It's a web, and it's like they're captured. I mean, Fred can speak to this.
Oh, yeah. It took me over 50 years before I found the courage to come out. And the only reason why I came out was because Contardo called up and wanted to meet my kids. I knew what he wanted. He wanted to rape them. And if it wasn't for that, I would have taken that right to my grave.
To go into a little bit more, I'm in my 51st year of therapy.
Wow.
Remember, I was abused from age 3 to 30. It has taken 50 years to get me to the point of believing that I will always have PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
I will always have anxiety and depression, and I don't have control over it. Meaning, I've learned skills to handle it, but by God, without the therapy, and that's why I keep, when people call us, Ken can vouch for this, I usually say, have you been in therapy? Are you in therapy? Can we help you with therapy? And God, it's the key, not to cure. There's no cure. It's the key to being able to function. And I have functioned fairly well. And you know why? One of the reasons why? Because I was in protected spaces. I was in a religious community, and all my needs were met. I could have been on the street with no food, and then I joined the priesthood, and that was like, country club. So I was really sheltered, and most of my fellow victim survivors, alcohol, drugs, thank God I never went that route, but I could have very easily, so.
The very good book that I've just finished reading, it's called The Soul Also Keeps the Score.
Oh,
It's by Rob McChesney. I met him at Loyola not too long ago. And it's quite deep, but very, very well done. I'm a victim of vicarious abuse. So what they call it is moral injury trauma. And the effect is the same as post-traumatic stress. So it doesn't go away. I live with it. As Bob says, you learn to manage it, but every morning is a trial.
Yeah.
I get anxiety attacks in the morning, every morning for 21 years.
Yeah,
And
I was
mental-
I'm sorry.
Bruce, go ahead. Bruce.
Yeah, I second Ken's book on that. The soul knows the score. I second your thoughts on that. I just want to say one thing about therapy. And I was about 50 when I was reporting my abuse, and it first came up when I was doing intensive supervision and pastoral counseling, but I tried to report it to my supervisor at the time, a clinical psychologist. He did not hear me. I also brought up to, I had a Jungian analyst, a very wonderful man. He did not hear me. And the third time that I brought it up was in the context of a therapist who recently died. He heard me, but didn't want to talk about it. And the turning point in my life came when I met Phil Saviano. And one conversation released me of a lot. And it was years of depression. And so on a daily basis, I am a VA chaplain. On a daily basis, probably 10% of the people I see are men and women who have military sexual trauma. And I had a cousin who was a Marine officer, female Marine officer, who was abused by her husband, had several miscarriages, beaten up, and all this other stuff. But I was interviewed recently by a guy who's doing a study at the VA in Los Angeles, and he said to me, "Well, why do guys report so late?" That was one question, and because and as Ken was talking about the webs that kids and teenagers and adults take in terms of where you finally begin to realize and that you can speak about it. But I said to him, the key to my help was, I think, joining SNAP through Phil Saviano. And the other key was finally finding somebody who would hear me and know what I was talking about. And so the therapist has to have the ability to listen to some very awful stuff that runs contra to, I think, normal psyches, because who would believe abusing children? We hear the stories of gorillas catching human children who are dropped into a cage, and the action is to nurture that human child. And so it's so difficult. So I think the book that Ken mentions, I think we all should read. But also, I think it's not only an act of courage on the part of the victim survivor, but it's also to find the right person to talk to who's willing to sit in and listen to very horrible stuff.
Yep.
So yeah. So that's all I have to say anyway.
Thank you, Bruce. Yeah. Yes, sir. Arthur Basilis. Arthur, oh, go ahead. I was going to tell him who you are, but you can tell us who you are.
Arthur, unmute yourself.
Okay, how's that?
Good.
Okay. Bob, I want to make a comment about you had said that you got fired
Yeah.
for an abuse. So what does that tell you about the mindset of the church? What are they more interested in, the victims or their self-preservation? Exactly. Okay. I just read that the Pope made some kind of a comment not to hide abuse anymore. However, They continue to donate millions of dollars to lobbying groups to prevent any type of disclosure. I think the church has been very successful for 2,000 years using attrition warfare. They wait you out. And given my circumstances, with all the news articles that were in the paper, the Daily News, the Inquirer, the CNN, whatever, that the church never responded. And the reason why they couldn't respond, because they can't respond, because all the allegations are true. It cost us the life of our child. And I can tell you now that I have been trying to meet with Archbishop Perez for over 6 months. I have sent him registered letters. I have met with his right-hand man, Brian McCarthy, who I had asked certain questions to, and his only responses were, "I don't know." What the result of that meeting was that we left with more trauma than what we arrived with. Sadly, the angel of misery has now camped out in our minds and has is not going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do I do? What is the resolution for this? Oh, the two priests, the priest and the brother, even though they admitted the abuse, none of them have been removed from ministry. Their cases were sent to the CDF, and they decided they're going to live a prayer of penance. So I got it. You were a priest. So what does that mean, prayer and penance, a life of prayer and penance? Is there a certain time you get up, you start praying, like a job? What is it? Who are they praying for? They're praying for us. And these prayers couldn't prevent what took place. They can't correct what they couldn't prevent.
Right.
So what is my recourse? You know, I'm dealing with that last Supreme Court hearing with the kid that was taken to Jersey from Pennsylvania, and the Supreme Court said because the Archdiocese of Philadelphia didn't own any property in New Jersey, they can't be held responsible. So when I see the attorney that represented the gentleman, I'm going to ask him, how did the priest get the kid to New Jersey? Did he use a car from a pool car from the Archdiocese?
Well, also, they owned property in Ventnor City. That's where the Cardinals' mansion was on the boardwalk. So they did own property in Jersey. Philadelphia did.
Well, what's his name? What was it? Bevilacqua was big down there. He liked big bosom women, and he liked to use a disguise to go into the casino and gamble.
Right. Right.
He was a phony.
They're not divine. You know how I feel about the church.
The bishops, within weeks after they're consecrated, they start drinking the Episcopal Kool-Aid.
Well, when it comes down to the church or the victims, who are they going to side with?
Right.
And everybody that puts any money in that collection basket is just as guilty as the people that commit the crimes.
Thanks, Artie. Yeah, you're true. It's about 3 minutes to 6. So how about, I don't want to stop anybody, but Bernice.
Yeah, I don't think that I can trust anybody except Ken and you and some people that I know. But why would I trust any priest now? Why would I think, how would I say, oh, he's good or he's not good? And also, do you have any idea of what the percentage might be that of abusers and people, priests are living with abusers? How many of them are not abusers as a percentage? Is there anything on that?
Well, yes, there are studies that have been done, but you know what? They've all been by the church. They've been paid for. Remember the John Jay study, paid for by the church, and it said that, I forget now, was it 4% of priests or something?
Yeah,
but
4%.
But then other studies said I think it's 15 to 20%. That's my dealing with various victims and knowing sort of being an insider and knowing what priests have done or have, do to kids. And so,
Are you
anybody
saying
else?
15 or 20% are abusers, or 15 to 20
15 to 20% of priests are abusers,
are abusers?
at least.
And what you're saying is the church, the bishops just don't care. I mean, I remember I
Right.
was on the Archdiocesan Review Board, which McCarrick started, believe it or not. And John Palladino was brought up before us, and he abused a kid with the idea that, and his excuse was, well, I thought he was 19. And it was decided that he was not to be around any kids. And what happens? He shows up at my son's confirmation. And he was in the sacristy with all altar boys and stuff. And I said, what's this about? And the bishop said, McCarrick said to me, well, what am I supposed to do with them?
Right.
I said, keep him away from children.
And Myers made him the vicar for priests,
Yes.
and then he became pastor, and he's currently pastor of St. Bartholomew's in Scotch Plains, has been there for years.
Yes.
I was
Grace?
part of St. Mary's in Colts Neck.
Oh,
And we had a priest come in, and he had obviously had some issues that he was sent to St. Mary's because they had no school or anything. But it turns out that he knew about it, but the youth minister had a priest friend from the Newark diocese, and she wanted the pastor to go with these teenagers on retreat, but oh no, he couldn't go. So she asked this fellow. Now, he obviously was not allowed to. He was supposed to be, away from children, blah, blah, blah. He was, credibly accused. Blah. Well, 2 years in a row, he went away with the kids from St. Mary's on an away retreat. And it wasn't until one of the parents realized his name and looked him up and realized it. And the parish went nuts. We had this huge meeting, and there was a lawyer there on behalf of the pastor. The pastor was removed the next morning, but the fact that it was allowed to happen, that this priest, and nothing happened to him. He went back to wherever he was kept in Newark, and nothing happened to him for doing it. But he was allowed to do that. So it just continues to happen, that nobody is paying attention.
Grace,
They're supposed to have a letter,
that's the famous case of Father Michael Fuji, who abused a kid in the Newark Archdiocese, okay? And Myers kept putting him into offices. He made him chaplain at St. Michael's Hospital in Newark, and then he made him, wait till you hear this, in the propagation of the faith, he was the one in charge of collecting donations from the children in the schools for the propagation of the faith. But then they finally caught him, meaning the authorities. The Bergen County prosecutor told Myers, if he's not out of the touch of children, one of you is going to go to jail, either Jack
Yes,
Duran
absolutely.
or Myers. So
Sorry to interrupt this, but
Go ahead.
it's 6 o'clock, so I'm not sure how to proceed. I'm sure we could talk
sure,
on
Yeah.
and on.
I don't mind.
I have to go to another webinar.
Bob, I have to go. I want to thank you and everyone. I want to agree with what you said at the beginning. The institutional church is probably one of the most corrupt organizations in the world. And the attitude towards human sexuality is warped, distorted, and completely out of whack with reality. And I think
Yes.
until that's addressed, this is going to continue to happen.
Peter, I'm sorry about your friend,
Yeah,
Peter, and I'm very thankful for your input and
sure.
for your support. It means, Fred and I and Ken, it means the world to us just to hear somebody say that. Thank you.
Welcome, thanks.
I just came late.
If people, before everybody leaves, we can stay if you want. Just realize that you have heard some very painful material that is going to have an impact on your body. So pay attention, be aware. Don't put yourself in difficult situations today. Watch who you're with. Just pay attention to what's going on in your body, in your mind today. So thank you, Bob, for bringing all of this forward. And we can now continue. Looks like Kevin,
like
you.
Kevin
I have
wanted
to go.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Bob.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Bob.
Anybody who has to go, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you
Okay.
very much for, I came late to this and Mr. I guess it's Fred Merigliano, Merigliano. And I felt I had walked into a horror show. It was absolutely horrible. And then Robert spoke. I never realized, when you read in the paper, you just read this is an abuse case. And you two gentlemen went into the nitty gritty, and it just struck me just how absolutely horrible it all is. So I thank you for your taking the time to do that.
Hi, Kevin.
Nice, Peggy.
Kevin and I have been friends since 5 years old.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I
You
was
both look very young, so.
I was in the juniorate at St. Joseph's Barrytown in the late 50s, early 60s, and a speaker came from Esopus. And I guess that might have been the same order that Robert was part of. I don't know.
Probably the Redemptorist. It was a priest?
No, it wasn't. It was
okay.
It's a brother.
Oh, could but very well have been, yeah.
But, okay. I thought he was a Marist or a Marianist. I'm not sure.
Marists were also there, yes.
Marist, okay.
Yes.
Good.
And what did he say?
Oh, so long ago, I've forgotten.
Oh, okay.
I guess it was just that they wanted to get speakers in different orders and backgrounds to talk to us.
What year was that, Kevin?
Well, I graduated in 1961, so and I went there in 59, so it was between 59 and 61.
A little before me, so yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Anybody else?
Well, here I go
Bernice.
again. Here I go again. But
All right.
if you say maybe 20% of the priests are abusers, the other 80% live with them. And so how come they don't say anything? I mean, they must know it.
This is the mantra. Because I was on the inside with priests, and they would say, oh, here comes Hoatson again with his abuse stuff. Well, I would say, why aren't you guys speaking up? Listen, I am 61 years old. I am 62 years old. I am 58 years old. I'm waiting to get to 70 to retire. I'm not saying a word. Because they would have been disciplined the way I was, or something similar. But oh yeah, they're afraid. Priests are indentured servants, basically. I think Ken would agree with me on that. But that they have control, like total control over you. I told Myers we could have a model program of abuse of children with road to recovery. Let me be as a priest. Let me do that. Absolutely not. So we did it anyway because Ken, who's a canon lawyer, says, wait a minute, we have every right to do that according to Canon 250, I think, which says that anybody of the faithful can start acts of service and goodness to other people. So we were following canon law, but yeah, the priests don't do anything because they're afraid.
Well, that doesn't say a lot for their character, I have to say,
I would agree with this. Anybody else?
Well, just to support what you were saying, Robert, I was just watching a TV show. Why is no one talking about Ohio State? Was the name of the TV show, and basically was about sexual abuse at Ohio State by a Dr. Richard Strauss, and it went on for a good deal of time, and no one said anything. And the fear that people had to speak out was, and also the shame that you also spoke about, that the athletes who were wrestlers and fencers and people who were very good in the sport were so ashamed of what happened they couldn't say anything. And the one woman who was the first to break the silence really was ignored.
Yep. Well, we just don't deal with clergy abuse, Road to Recovery. We have victims. We work with victims of Jerry Sandusky at Penn State, Bill Cosby.
Oh, yeah, all right.
We work with, now, you know who, another at Ohio State is Congressman Jim Jordan.
Right.
Was the assistant wrestling coach, and allegations have arisen about him not saying anything primarily, but he claims, oh no, never, I have no idea what's. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? I mean, we could probably spend a lot of time on the church's response, but or lack.
Can I end, Peg, with a sort of comical, sad story? And I was going to do this anyway. In my book, there's a chapter called "Murder He Wrote."
Yes.
So, okay. Palm Sunday, 2011, Immaculate Conception Church in Newark. Father John Connor goes to the pulpit and does his homily for Palm Sunday. And during his homily, he says, I think those who have alleged that Father John LaFerrera abused them should be killed. Yes. So what I was with Sam Rivera I called Sam Rivera, who was abused in that parish by Father John, and we went over to the Newark police station right away, and they said they couldn't do anything about it because he didn't say he was going to kill us. He said we should be killed. So Holy Thursday comes, and we go back, all right, to demonstrate, and we're there with our signs, and Connor walks across the parking lot to open up the locks to the church. And Sammy says to him, Father, you want us dead? Here we are. He said, Sammy, I don't mean you. I mean him. And pointed at me. So I was the one he wanted dead. And a lot of other people have too. So
Oh, boy.
I can laugh at it now, but.
Did you have security?
No, oh no, we did have, the police, some of the police were absolutely fantastic, I have stories about that, but some police were not nice, so it runs the gamut,
Could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Did that priest Santero ever get back to you?
Who, the one that threatened to kill me?
No. Remember the article that you replied to? That priest?
Oh, no, I replied to an article in NCR.
Yeah.
But you know what the problem is, Art? Sometimes in my writings, I will put things that the editors will say, oh my God, we couldn't put that in. It's just too, whatever, it's too strong, and I figured when I wrote it, I said they're probably not going to print it, but I just have to tone it down a little bit when I write some of the stuff.
Okay, but he never got back to you, that priest.
Oh no! Oh, I'm sorry.
We're on the same page. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Art. I missed the one you're talking about. Father.
Santera,
He's in Hoboken, Santora.
Yeah. Right.
Father Alexander Santora is the pastor of Our Lady Grace in Hoboken.
Okay.
And he wrote an article in the Bergen Record claiming that priests are victims too.
Yeah.
And it was a whole, I called it the pity party for priests article, And so I wrote in response. Now, I've written in response before to Alex Santora, and they printed some stuff. This time I knew they probably wouldn't print it. But the next Sunday, Art, I went to the church and I demonstrated with my signs. And Alexander came out of the rectory, saw me, and tore ass back into the rectory. And he didn't even say masses there. I mean, he must have gotten the other guys to say the mass because but this is what we do. We keep, as they say, you rock the boat and you keep rocking. So
Good. Yeah.
anybody want the last word?
Think you should have it, Bob.
No, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. I hope it was helpful. I just wish, when people see books like this come out or they see us demonstrating, or they see, a lot of people don't even want to touch the issue. And it's very painful. But we're as Ken Lass always says, we're doing the salami method. We're doing one thin slice at a time. So
Yeah, and you know what? I always say to Ken Lash, but when you finish the salami, you got the bologna to take care of.
that's the best ending, Bernice. Thank you.
Great, Bernice.
That's great,
Yes.
Bernice.
Great summary.
Bob, thank you for everything you do, not just for today, but for all you've done all these years. Road to Recovery, your presence everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. No, thank you for having me. And Bill, I want to thank Bill for coming all the way from New Rochelle, New York, to and Art from down south New Jersey. But Bill and I were colleagues in religious life, and
Fred.
he was an inspiration to me. Yes, and Fred.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Fred and I will be in the courtroom tomorrow morning at the Del Barton trial.
Wow.
So, Bill, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, Bob, can you keep us posted about that trial?
Yeah, there's so much going on, Art, that it's hard to summarize, but I've been doing it on Facebook a little bit. So
Okay, yeah, I'll be looking forward to it. I like to keep up with that.
okay, good.
All right.
But all I can say is I am a gay man. And, I've never addressed this in my life until I was over 50 years old. And I was taught in my early age that sexuality was something that was mortally sinful. And I carried that with me for the first 30, 40 years of my life. So, but I began 20 years of therapy at the age of 47, and slowly began to let go of the things that I was taught. And John McNeil was one of my therapists, a wonderful Jesuit priest who was persecuted and thrown out of the Jesuits because of the stance that he took for the gay community. But and I recently wrote a memoir of my life. It's called the Memoirs of a Gay Christian Brother, a 90-year journey. And so I just needed to do that because I kept journals for about 30 years. So I said, what am I going to do with these journals? So I put it in writing. and so, but I've always have been aware of Bob, and I've admired him for his courage, and he's probably a persona non grata in our congregation. But
Say the least.
But it was, but thank you, Bob, for sharing today.
Thank you, Bill. Well, it is 6:18, and I'm so glad we were able to continue.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
we'll keep up the fight.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
All right.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Bob. Thank you again. Good night, everybody.
Good night, all.
Thank you all for